The ocean's beauty masks sudden danger. Surfers, divers, kayakers, and sailors have all faced predators that strike without warning, turning calm waters into chaos. From South Africa to Australia, Mexico to Norway, ordinary days became battles for survival in the blink of an eye. Lives were forever changed in a tide of fear and blood. In this video, we'll dive into 6 terrifying shark attack stories that reveal the sea's brutal reality. At sunrise on August 10, 2025, the waves along Gansby glimmered gold as 8 surfers paddled into the swells near Shark Alley. Among them were Daniel Meyer, 22, and his older brother Luke, 25, both raised along the South African coast where saltwater and surfboards had shaped much of their youth. Their bond was built on shared dawn sessions, where they competed playfully, yet always looked out for one another. Visiting with them that morning was Claire Holden, a 27-year-old traveler from Australia, known among her friends for chasing surf breaks in distant countries. She had flown halfway across the world for the thrill of riding waves in one of the most famous yet notorious surf zones on Earth. Another member of the lineup was Peter Van Dyck, a local waterman whose routine dawn patrols reflected years of familiarity with the currents and reefs. Together with 4 others, they formed a loose circle, boards bobbing as they waited for the next clean set to rise. The ocean seemed peaceful, though its history carried warnings. Swells rolled steadily, the air crisp, and the surfers paddled deeper, chasing the calm rhythm of the sea. Yet beneath them, baitfish darted in schools, flashing silver in the dim light. Their frantic movements carried signals through the water, drawing the attention of something far larger. For 10 minutes, the surfers moved freely, unaware of the massive shape gliding closer from below, its shadow concealed by the shifting waves above. Without warning, the water detonated in violence. A huge, great white shark erupted beneath Luke's board, its jaws smashing the fiberglass in two. The explosion of foam and spray sent him sprawling as the predator dragged him under in a single pull. The sea around him turned red in an instant, the sight freezing every surfer in shock. Daniel reacted instantly, paddling hard toward his brother, but the predator surged again, its massive head swinging sideways. Teeth raked across Daniel's thigh, tearing flesh and unleashing a torrent of blood into the surf. His board spun out as he clutched his wound, his cries lost beneath the roar of waves and panic. Claire, caught just meters away, felt the current shift as the predator veered toward her. In seconds, its teeth sank into her arm, thrashing her body violently before it released. She screamed, her board flipping as blood stained the water around her. Panic erupted across the lineup, boards scattering as Peter was struck next. The predator slammed into him with brutal force, knocking him clean off his board. Foam, screams, and crimson streaks filled the lineup. The surfers clawed at their boards, striking the water, desperate to fend off the predator that circled with terrifying precision. The once orderly group had been shattered in moments, trapped in a nightmare as the massive great white pressed its assault. The water around the shattered lineup foamed with blood and debris as the surfers struggled against both panic and pain. Boards were scattered and screams carried over the surf, while the predator circled with terrifying patience. Just beyond the chaos, lifeguards stationed on jet skis reacted instantly, racing into the red-streaked zone where the surfers were trapped. Engines roared as they weaved between floating boards, pulling the first wounded onto sled platforms. Every second stretched thin as the predator made another wide arc, its dorsal fin cutting across the surface like a knife through glass. Daniel, clutching his torn thigh, was dragged toward one of the sleds, his strength failing as blood gushed freely into the waves. Luke, still missing beneath the surface, suddenly broke through, thrashing with one arm as the other hung limp. Foam and crimson swirled around him until rescuers pulled him aboard, his body trembling uncontrollably. Claire, half submerged and shaking, was hauled up next, her arm mangled and dripping red across the boards. Nearby, Peter surfaced, gasping, his face pale with shock, his board gone. His body was hoisted by another lifeguard who braced him tightly as the jet ski roared back toward shore. The predator made 2 more passes before retreating into the deep, its shape vanishing beneath the churned water. In under 4 minutes, the lineup had been destroyed, leaving broken boards and streaks of crimson as grim reminders of the assault. The beach, once filled with quiet watchers, erupted into urgency as the wounded were rushed onto the sand. Paramedics waiting on shore worked feverishly, wrapping tourniquets and applying bandages to the gaping wounds. Daniel's thigh was tied tight to slow the bleeding, while Luke's limp arm was secured to prevent further damage. Claire's shredded limb was wrapped in layer after layer of soaked gauze, her body trembling from shock. Peter, though less injured, shook uncontrollably as he clung to rescuers, unable to process what had just unfolded. Ambulances sped toward the nearest medical facility, their sirens wailing as locals and tourists alike stood frozen in disbelief. Boards floated back with the tide, some broken in half, others streaked with red, silent evidence of how quickly a calm morning had collapsed into horror. At the hospital, surgeons worked through the day and into the night, stitching deep wounds, repairing torn tissue, and transfusing blood to replace what had been lost. The brothers endured hours of surgery, one to repair a crushed leg and the other to save the use of an arm. Claire's recovery involved delicate work to salvage muscle, while Peter required treatment for punctures and trauma. News of the attack spread worldwide, shaking surf communities and drawing sharp warnings from marine experts. They explained that multiple splashes, baitfish movement, and clustered surfers in predator-rich waters created a scenario that invited sudden strikes. Locals acknowledged that Shark Alley had always been known for its dangers, but few had seen an attack unfold with such speed and ferocity against an entire group. In the weeks that followed, recovery was slow and filled with uncertainty. The scars were not only physical, but deeply emotional. Boards, once symbols of freedom and adventure, now stood broken, stored away as reminders of the day when survival hung by seconds. For the survivors, the ocean that had given them joy now carried a shadow of terror, a memory that would remain etched in every wave. On February 16, 2024, the reef-studded waters off Queensland shimmered in the morning sun as three friends prepared for a kayaking trip they had been looking forward to for weeks. James Reed, 28, had grown up near the coast and loved exploring the ocean. His adventurous spirit made him the leader of the group, often encouraging others to try new outdoor activities. Beside him was Sophie Turner, 31, who had spent much of her life hiking, swimming, and taking part in community sports. She valued time outdoors as a way to balance her busy professional life. Alex Chen, 26, the youngest of the trio, was a fitness enthusiast who often joined James on cycling routes and water sports. Together, the three shared a bond over their love for exploring nature and testing their limits in new environments. That morning, their kayaks cut smoothly across the calm water, the reef visible beneath them in dazzling shades of blue and green. Fish darted between the corals, the scene peaceful and inviting. The trio paddled side by side, laughing and pointing out the beauty below. Their trip seemed ideal. The ocean was calm, and the shoreline was a safe distance behind them. None of them suspected the danger lurking below, hidden in the shifting light of the water. Without warning, the calm broke. A massive tiger shark, nearly 12 feet long, surged upward from the depths with explosive force. It rammed James's kayak, tilting the vessel violently. Before he could react, the predator's jaws clamped around his right forearm, crushing and tearing through flesh. Blood poured into the sea, painting the clear water red in seconds. James screamed in agony as the kayak rocked, threatening to overturn completely. Sophie and Alex froze for only a moment before springing into action. They paddled hard toward him, slamming their kayaks against the water to create noise and force. Sophie struck the surface with her paddle while Alex angled his kayak to block the predator from circling closer. The shark twisted, its fins slicing through the waves as it returned for another pass. The water foamed with every movement, the kayaks rocking wildly as the trio fought to keep balance in the chaos. For long, terrifying minutes, the predator circled, each shadow below the surface sending fresh waves of panic through them. James clutched the side of his vessel, his arm mangled and bleeding heavily, his strength draining fast. Sophie shouted and slammed her paddle harder while Alex struck the water again and again with his hull. Their frantic efforts finally bought them precious seconds. At last, the tiger shark veered off, fading into the deeper blue. The ocean fell eerily quiet again, leaving only streaks of red and the gasps of three shaken kayakers. But the fight was far from over. James's injury was catastrophic, and survival would now depend on what happened next. The ocean grew calm after the tiger shark slipped back into the deeper blue, but the silence carried a heavy weight. James slumped against the edge of his kayak, his mangled arm bleeding freely into the sea. Sophie and Alex paddled hard toward the nearest strip of shoreline, guiding his vessel while keeping their eyes fixed on the water, fearing the dark shadow might return at any second. Every stroke of the paddles felt slow against the urgency of time slipping away. James's pale face showed the strain of shock and blood loss, his breathing shallow as he clung weakly to the side. The reef that had looked beautiful only moments earlier now felt endless, each wave a reminder of how far they still had to go. Sophie's muscles ached from paddling, yet she forced herself forward, calling to Alex to stay alongside her. They kept their kayaks tight around James, forming a protective shield in case the predator circled back. For long minutes, the only sound was the slap of paddles and James's uneven breaths. The beach drew closer, but his strength faded with every moment. When they reached the shallows, Alex jumped into the surf and dragged James's kayak onto the sand. Sophie followed, rushing to help lift their injured friend onto the shore. The sight of his arm, torn and soaked in red, forced them into frantic action. With no medical supplies, Sophie ripped fabric from her shirt to bind the wound, wrapping it tightly above the bite to slow the flow. Alex pressed down with trembling hands, his body shaking as he tried to keep calm. Their quick actions bought critical minutes, but the bleeding remained severe. Emergency services were alerted by locals who had seen the commotion from the beach. Sirens soon echoed across the coast as paramedics arrived, racing toward the group with stretchers and equipment. James was lifted swiftly, his head lolling as oxygen masks were secured and fluids prepared. Sophie and Alex stood frozen, their bodies coated in salt water and sweat, unable to shake the image of the predator's massive fins slicing through the sea. The ambulance carried James to the nearest hospital, where surgeons worked for hours to close deep wounds and prevent further blood loss. Though he survived, part of his forearm was gone, leaving permanent damage that no amount of skill could restore. Doctors praised the swift response of Sophie and Alex, explaining that without their immediate efforts, James might not have lived long enough to reach medical care. News of the attack spread quickly across Queensland, sparking debate over the risks of kayaking in reef-rich waters where predators often patrol. Experts explain that tiger sharks are opportunistic hunters, frequently targeting splashing brightly colored objects or isolated vessels. They stress the importance of awareness and safety measures in areas known for large predators. For James, the aftermath was both physically and emotionally draining. His body bore the scars of the attack, and the loss of his arm would forever alter his life. Sophie and Alex, though uninjured, carried the heavy memory of those minutes on the water. Their friendship grew stronger, bound by survival, but the sea they once loved now had a shadow that none of them could forget. On November 11, 2019, the clear waters of Gansby shimmered beneath the morning sun as tourists gathered for an adventure they had long dreamed about. Among them was 34-year-old Emily Saunders, a British traveler who had long carried a fascination for the sea. Raised in Brighton, she had grown up along the southern coast of England, often walking the pier with her family and watching the restless tides roll in. Over time, her curiosity for marine life grew into a passion, leading her to study biology at university and later pursue a career in wildlife photography. Her work took her across Europe and Asia, where she documented species in forests, mountains, and coral reefs. Yet one goal had always stood out: to see great white sharks in their natural environment. The cage dive in South Africa promised to fulfill that dream. Emily had arrived in Gansby a few days earlier, carrying cameras and waterproof gear that had been carefully packed for the occasion. She joined a small group of tourists on a charter boat designed for cage diving, each participant eager to catch a glimpse of the legendary predators known to dominate these waters. Guides gave safety instructions, explaining how the steel cage acted as a barrier between humans and sharks. For Emily, the idea of being so close to an apex predator was thrilling, a chance to capture rare photographs that could inspire others to appreciate the power of the ocean. She smiled as the boat cut through the swells, scanning the horizon for fins. The water that morning was cool and calm, the perfect setting for the dive. Crew members secured the heavy cage to the side of the vessel and lowered it into the sea. One by one, the tourists descended into the enclosure, masks fitted and cameras ready. When it was Emily's turn, she climbed down the ladder with steady hands, her heart racing as she submerged into the blue. From inside, she leaned forward, pressing her camera against the bars to capture passing shapes below. Silver fish darted across the frame, but her eyes stayed fixed on the deeper shadows where something larger might appear. Suddenly, movement stirred in the gloom. Out of the depths, a massive great white shark, nearly 16 feet in length, surged upward with astonishing speed. Its immense body struck the cage with such force that the steel bars rattled violently. The impact echoed like thunder, and before anyone could react, the predator twisted its head and drove forward again. In one terrifying moment, its jaws pushed through the bent bars and clamped onto Emily's shoulder and torso. Her camera fell into the water as her body was jerked sideways against the steel, blood clouding around her. Crew on deck shouted and moved instantly, hurling chum buckets to distract the animal and striking at it with poles. Yet the predator's strength was overwhelming. It shook the cage, pulling her partially through the bent opening, thrashing with relentless power. Other divers inside recoiled in horror, pressing themselves against the far wall of the enclosure as the water filled with turbulence and foam. Seconds stretched into a nightmare, every moment defined by the sound of grinding metal and the violent surge of the sea. Above, the deck was chaos. Guides fought to break free from the water, desperate to force the shark to release its grip. Tourists screamed from the rails, frozen as they watched the predator tear into the cage with unstoppable might. The once calm excursion had transformed into a scene of horror, the very safety structure designed to protect now failing under the force of one of the ocean's most feared predators. The attack had only just begun, but the fate of Emily Saunders hung in the balance of survival as the predator thrashed around her, its shadow blotting out the light. The predator thrashed with brutal force, dragging Emily against the twisted frame as the cage groaned under the strain. The crew above fought desperately, striking the water and jamming poles between the steel bars, but the jaws of the great white did not loosen. Each violent pull spread red through the current, clouding visibility for everyone in the enclosure. For a brief instant, the predator released, only to surge again, its immense body colliding with the structure until a section bent outward like soft metal. Emily's body was torn partially into open water, and within seconds her movements ceased as the shark shook her with merciless power. Panic seized the boat. Tourists clutched the rails, their faces pale, some unable to look while others stared in horror. The guides shouted and threw flares into the sea, the bright bursts forcing the animal to retreat momentarily. With a final thrash, the predator slipped into the gloom, leaving behind a churn of bubbles, blood, and silence. Emily's camera floated to the surface, cracked and useless, a haunting symbol of what had just occurred. The other divers scrambled up the ladder as fast as they could, hands trembling as they reached the deck. They collapsed in shock, ripping off masks and gasping for breath, their eyes wide with disbelief at how quickly safety had failed. On deck, crew members moved in frantic unison, scanning the water for any sign of her. Nets were thrown, spotlights swept the waves, and radios crackled with distress calls to coastal authorities. The sea, moments before calm, now looked hostile and endless. For over an hour, the vessel remained on site, joined by rescue craft that searched every direction. Divers lowered into the water with extreme caution, but only fragments of the steel cage and torn neoprene were found drifting near the surface. The ocean had claimed Emily completely, giving no closure to those who had stood only feet away when it happened. When the boat returned to port, silence hung over the group. News spread instantly through the community, drawing locals and journalists to the pier. Many stared as survivors disembarked, their faces etched with shock. Emergency responders guided them into waiting vehicles for medical checks, but most were uninjured physically. Their trauma lay deeper, replaying the sound of bending steel and the image of the predator's massive head forcing its way through bars that were supposed to protect. Interviews taken later revealed the disbelief that something designed as safe had become a trap, offering no escape when the animal struck with its full strength. Experts soon analyzed the event, pointing out that great whites in this region are among the largest and most powerful in the world. They explained how sudden lunges and high-speed strikes could overwhelm even reinforced cages if conditions allowed. The incident reignited debates about whether cage diving, despite its popularity, poses an unacceptable risk to tourists. Some argued it brought awareness to conservation, while others insisted the spectacle provoked unnatural encounters that endangered both humans and animals. In the weeks that followed, tour operators faced new regulations that required them to strengthen their equipment and revise their safety measures. For Emily's family back in Britain, grief was magnified by the absence of her body. Condolence messages filled online platforms where she once shared her photography. Her final posts had now been transformed into memorials. Fellow travelers left flowers along the South African coast, their colors bright against the gray sea that had taken her. Her story became both tragedy and warning, a reminder of how even moments meant to celebrate beauty could turn into encounters with raw and uncontrollable power. The memory of her final dive lingered, etched not only into the hearts of those who witnessed it, but also into the collective understanding of the risks humans take when stepping into the domain of the ocean's greatest predator. On March 12, 2025, the sunlit waters off Baja California shimmered as 29-year-old Ethan Walker steered his jet ski across the open sea. Ethan had always been drawn to adventure. Growing up in Arizona, he spent summers visiting the coast with his family, where he first fell in love with water sports. By his late teens, he had learned to surf, dive, and wakeboard, but jet skiing became his favorite. The speed, spray, and freedom of riding across vast stretches of water gave him a sense of exhilaration unmatched by anything else. He was also known for his cautious approach, often wearing proper safety gear and keeping a safe distance from nearby boats. That morning, however, the ocean had other plans. The waters near Baja were alive with activity. Schools of tuna darted beneath the surface, chased by larger predators hidden in the depths. Tourists on nearby vessels snapped photos of dolphins and seabirds diving into the waves. Ethan, unaware of the danger gathering below, revved the engine of his jet ski, carving across the swells. Every turn sprayed arcs of white foam, the machine's roar echoing across the water. To him, it was the perfect day to ride. Then, without warning, the calm fractured. A sleek short-fin mako, nearly 12 feet long, surged from below with astonishing speed. It struck the underside of the jet ski with such force that Ethan lost control and was thrown headfirst into the water. The sudden impact left him disoriented, and before he could regain his bearings, the predator lunged. Its powerful jaws clamped onto his left forearm, teeth slicing through neoprene and into flesh. The pain was searing, his scream muffled by seawater as blood spread in a dark cloud around him. Ethan thrashed, kicking hard and reaching for the jet ski that floated nearby. Desperation pushed him to cling to its side, using the hull as a barrier between himself and the predator. The shark circled, its dorsal fin cutting sharp arcs through the surface before it darted forward again. Ethan swung his legs frantically, trying to keep distance, while gripping the slick surface of the craft with his good arm. Every movement felt slower, the water dragging at him as his strength ebbed away. The predator lunged once more, jaws snapping so close that they scraped the side of the jet ski. For tense moments it pressed the attack, its sleek body twisting with terrifying precision. Ethan's body shook with exhaustion, but he refused to let go. His survival now depended not on speed, but on holding his position until help could reach him. In the distance, a tour boat had spotted the commotion. Its crew leaned forward, pointing at the circling predator and the lone figure fighting for his life. Rescue was racing toward him, but the outcome still teetered in those bloodied waters. The rescue boat closed the distance quickly, its engine cutting across the swells as crew members prepared for urgent action. Ethan clung desperately to the side of his jet ski, his left arm hanging in tatters, the blood spreading wide into the water. The short-fin mako circled a final time, its sleek body rising just beneath the surface as if deciding whether to strike again. Crew members leaned forward, striking the water with poles and tossing flotation rings to distract it. The noise, light, and sudden splashes shifted the predator's focus just long enough for rescuers to maneuver in. With swift precision, they pulled Ethan from the water, his limp body slamming against the deck as multiple hands dragged him clear of the foaming surface. The predator veered once more, jaws snapping at the stern before disappearing back into the depths. The scene on the boat turned immediately frantic. His wetsuit hung shredded at the arm, deep lacerations exposing muscle and tissue. Crew members pressed cloth tightly against the wounds, working to slow the heavy flow. His breathing came in sharp bursts, shock rattling his body as his skin turned pale beneath the sun. The boat sped toward shore, its hull slamming hard against each swell as time pressed down on everyone aboard. One rescuer monitored his pulse, while another wrapped layer after layer of bandages across the torn flesh, replacing each as blood soaked through. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain, but he remained conscious enough to grip the side rails. Each passing moment felt heavy, as though the predator's shadow still lingered beneath them. When they reached land, paramedics were already waiting for them. Ethan was lifted onto a stretcher, and saline drip started as he was rushed into the ambulance. Sirens wailed as he was transported to the nearest hospital, every bump in the road sending tremors of agony through his body. Emergency staff met him at the doors, whisking him into surgery without delay. Surgeons cleaned the ragged edges of the bite, stitching through layers of muscle and repairing torn vessels. Hours passed before his condition was stabilized. The damage was extensive but not fatal. News of the attack spread swiftly across Baja California. Locals who relied on the sea shook their heads with quiet recognition, aware that predators roamed these waters whenever tuna schools gathered near the shore. Tourists, however, were struck by fear, many rethinking excursions planned for the following days. Experts interviewed by media outlets explained that short-fin makos were among the fastest sharks in the world, capable of explosive bursts of speed, and were drawn quickly to splashing or commotion on the surface. They emphasized that Ethan's survival was owed to both his instinct to use the jet ski as a barrier and the rescue boat's immediate response. For Ethan, the aftermath extended beyond his wounds. Weeks of recovery lay ahead, his arm wrapped in heavy dressings, with physiotherapy sessions scheduled to restore movement. He carried deep scars that would remain for life, constant reminders of the day the sea turned violent. The mental weight proved just as heavy, nights filled with flashes of sharp teeth and violent thrashing beneath the waves. His love for the ocean was not erased, but it was forever altered, tempered by the knowledge that beauty and danger often coexist on its surface. On June 12, 2025, the waters off Western Australia shimmered under the morning sun as a specialized team prepared for an inspection dive. The operation involved 6 crew members, all trained divers, assigned to assess the submerged structures of a semi-submersible sea drill. Among them was Thomas Reed, a seasoned lead engineer who had worked offshore for nearly a decade. Known for his calm approach to high-pressure situations, Thomas had gained a reputation for leading dangerous dives with precision and steady judgment. His career had been built around ensuring rigs remained safe and operational, often working in harsh conditions where risk was a daily companion. Alongside him was Maya Lopez, a diver who had joined the crew only 3 years earlier, but had already proven her resilience in difficult waters. Born and raised near coastal towns, Maya had developed a fascination with the ocean early in life, later choosing diving as both a career and a passion. Her colleagues admired her sharp memory for safety protocols and quick thinking when tasks grew complicated. For Maya, each mission was not just work, but a challenge to prove herself in an industry dominated by experience and endurance. That morning, the group entered the water, their wetsuits pressed tightly against the chill of the sea. They descended steadily, guided by the faint light from the surface and the beams from their helmets. Around them, the shadows of the drill's massive legs stretched down into the depths, coated in barnacles and algae that needed assessment. The divers checked for corrosion, noting patches of marine growth while communicating carefully through hand signals. The mission seemed routine, yet tension always lingered when descending into regions known to host large predators. As Thomas moved closer to the base of one of the supports, the water shifted suddenly. From below, a dark shape surged upward with explosive force. In an instant, the massive form of a great white shark, measuring 16 feet, snapped through the gloom. Its jaws clamped dangerously close to Thomas's leg, missing flesh by inches, but shaking the water violently. The strike threw him backward, scattering bubbles as his tools rattled against the structure. The entire team froze, panic spreading as the predator began to circle. Its broad body glided with deliberate menace, cutting wide arcs around the divers. Bubbles rose frantically as fins beat against the current in uneven motions. Each kick and movement seemed only to draw the animal closer, its senses tuned to vibration and distress. In that critical moment, Maya's training came to the fore. She reached for the strobe mechanism on her helmet and activated it with a sharp flick of her wrist. A burst of flashing light erupted in the water, disorienting the predator just enough to stall its approach. Meanwhile, Thomas kicked himself toward a drifting tool crate, positioning it between himself and the shark's path. The box spun slowly in the current, creating a makeshift barrier as the predator circled once more, its pale belly glinting in the beams of their lights. The divers tightened their formation, their breaths loud in their helmets, knowing that every second stretched the line between survival and disaster. The predator lingered near the crate, its shadow shifting through the beams of light, circling with unsettling calm. The divers remained close together, each breath loud inside their helmets as they tried to maintain control. For a moment, the flashing strobes and drifting barrier bought them enough space to signal upward for immediate recovery. Above, the surface team reacted quickly, lowering a steel rescue cage into the water while pulling ropes taut to guide the divers back. The sound of metal striking against the waves created more disturbance, further distracting the great white as it made another slow pass. Thomas pushed toward the moving cage with steady but cautious kicks, keeping the crate between himself and the circling predator. Maya stayed close, her helmet still flashing bright bursts that cut across the murky water. One by one, the group edged toward the rising platform, knowing that every movement had to be deliberate and precise. The predator made one last surge, brushing the side of the crate with its powerful body, before finally veering away into the deep. Relief surged through the divers as they entered the safety of the cage, their bodies trembling from both cold and adrenaline. When the crew pulled them aboard, the scene turned frantic. Helmets were removed and hands shook as the divers clambered onto the deck. Thomas sank against the rails, pale and shivering, his legs scraped and bruised from the near strike. Maya sat nearby, her breathing ragged, but her quick thinking was credited for saving the team. The others spoke little, stunned by how fast the encounter had unfolded and how narrowly they had escaped. As the drill vessel returned to shore, reports were filed and safety officers documented every detail. Experts later explained that unusual seal movements in the region had likely drawn the predator closer to the rig than normal. The combination of flashing lights, metal vibrations, and divers thrashing in tight quarters created the perfect scenario for the animal to investigate aggressively. In the aftermath, company officials reviewed emergency procedures, stressing the importance of protective cages and surface monitoring whenever dives were scheduled in predator-rich areas. For the crew involved, the event left lasting marks. Some faced nights haunted by the image of pale jaws breaking through the gloom, while others found themselves hesitant to return to deep-water tasks. Maya was praised for her courage, yet she admitted that the memory of the slow circling shadow would never fade. The sea drill resumed work weeks later, but for those present on June 12, 2025, the ocean had revealed its true and merciless power. On January 22, 2025, the fjords near Tromsø shimmered under pale winter light as a 60-foot yacht cut through the icy waters. Aboard were 5 passengers, including Thomas Harding, his family, and their friend Lars Jensen, a 29-year-old Norwegian who had grown up near these same rugged coasts. Lars was no stranger to the sea. As a child, he had spent countless days fishing with his father, learning to read the shifts of current and wind. Later, he pursued studies in marine biology before settling into work as a coastal guide, introducing visitors to the wildlife of Norway's cold northern waters. For him, the yacht trip was more than a leisure outing. It was a familiar connection to the natural world he admired deeply. The Harding family, by contrast, had come seeking adventure far from their home. They had chartered the vessel to experience the fjords, renowned for their snow-covered cliffs and abundant marine life. The boat offered a sense of safety, its steel frame and polished deck sturdy against the dark water below. The passengers moved between cameras and binoculars, hoping to catch a glimpse of seals or whales surfacing in the distance. Their laughter carried over the cold breeze, mixing with the quiet churn of the yacht's engines. The sea was calm, but that calm masked the raw force of nature beneath. Pods of orcas often patrolled these waters during winter, hunting herring that gathered in massive shoals. Their presence was not unusual, but encounters this close to a small yacht always carried risk. None of the passengers expected danger as the black and white shapes appeared on the horizon, their dorsal fins slicing the surface like knives through glass. The pod drew nearer, sleek bodies rising and falling in rhythm. At first, it was breathtaking, a display of power and beauty few ever witnessed so closely. Lars leaned over the railing, eager to capture a better view of the largest orca in the group. Its immense frame glided just beneath the yacht, its pale patch flashing as it rolled beneath the hull. Then, without warning, it breached. The strike came with violent force. The orca's body collided against the side of the yacht, sending a shock through the vessel. Lars lost his balance, pitched forward, and crashed into the freezing water below. The impact knocked the air from his chest, and icy cold gripped him instantly. Before he could orient himself, the predator surged again. Massive jaws closed around his side, pulling him under with terrifying strength. For seconds, that felt eternal. Chaos exploded across the deck. Passengers screamed and scrambled, reaching for ropes and shouting for help. Thomas Harding grabbed for a line while others pounded the hull in panic. Below, the dark water roiled as Lars thrashed in the grip of the giant predator, his body twisting violently as he tried to break free. The sea that had seemed calm moments before now erupted with foam, shadows, and the brutal clash of man against beast. The orca released him as suddenly as it had struck, leaving Lars gasping and disoriented in the freezing sea. The crew scrambled to haul him back aboard, his body soaked, trembling, and on the edge of hypothermia. But the danger was not yet over. The pod circled still, their towering fins cutting arcs around the battered yacht. Lars lay sprawled on the yacht's deck, shivering uncontrollably as cold water poured from his clothes. His skin was pale and his breath came in shallow bursts as crew members wrapped him in thick blankets. The freezing grip of the sea had sapped his strength, leaving him barely able to move. Around him, the rest of the passengers stood in stunned silence, eyes fixed on the circling pod that still shadowed the vessel. The towering fins cut arcs around the boat, a reminder that the threat had not fully passed. The yacht rocked under the lingering weight of the encounter. Each swell seemed sharper, each ripple carrying tension as the passengers clung to railings and braced themselves. The orcas lingered for long minutes, their sleek bodies rising and disappearing in the dark water. Though they made no further strikes, the sense of danger was overwhelming. The passengers watched in silence, their fear amplified by the eerie patience of the pod. It was as if the predators were reminding the humans whose world they had entered. At last, the orcas drifted away, sliding into the depths as smoothly as they had arrived. Relief washed over the yacht, but the silence remained heavy. The vessel's crew rushed to regain control, checking the hull for damage and ensuring the engines were steady. Meanwhile, Lars was given hot drinks and more blankets, his trembling body slowly regaining warmth. His eyes stayed wide and distant, haunted by the memory of immense jaws and cold water dragging him below. By the time the yacht returned to shore, word of the incident had already spread through the nearby harbor. Locals and fellow travelers gathered at the pier, murmuring in disbelief as the battered passenger stepped onto land. Medical teams met them quickly, escorting Lars to a nearby clinic where his body temperature was stabilized. His injuries were limited to bruising and deep scratches, but the shock of near drowning in icy waters left a far deeper mark. Experts later explained that orcas are powerful hunters, often curious but capable of sudden aggression when boats cross their feeding routes. The incident reminded everyone that the fjords, though breathtaking, are also wild and unpredictable. Guides and officials urged visitors to exercise greater caution, emphasizing that even close observations from sturdy vessels carried risk. For those aboard that yacht, the memory became permanent. The Hardings and Lars carried with them the image of black and white giants rising from the depths, and the realization of how quickly calm seas could turn hostile. The trip meant to celebrate beauty ended as a stark lesson in survival, leaving behind both gratitude for rescue and awe at the raw force of nature.